Hi, good afternoon, everyone. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Lee Panglia and I'm head of CIPD in Scotland and Northern Ireland. So I would like to warmly welcome you to our webinar today on flexible working, which is being delivered for our CIPD members in Scotland by Timewise. As an organisation, CIPD has worked in partnership with Timewise on many projects and campaigns south of the border. And I'm absolutely delighted to be working with Emma and her team, Emma, who you'll meet in a minute, or you'll actually see on the screen in Scotland. So this webinar forms part of Timewise's project that is supported by Scottish Government on a fair, flexible work programme for Scotland. And I'm sure Emma will share more about that in a minute with you. We're all sitting in our home at the moment, in this enforced situation of home working for many of us. And that makes it more important than ever for us for people managers to work with employees and to actively support them in flexible ways of working, especially when we have no idea, unfortunately, how long we're going to be in this situation. And then as things progress, it's around how we encourage different ways of different forms of flexible working rather than just home working. But anyway, we've got an hour today. I don't really want to take up any more of your time because I know that Emma's got a lot of ground to cover. So at this stage, I'm going to pass you over to Emma, who will talk you through the content of the session and on the session. And I look forward to all your questions, observations and comments as we go through. Thank you. Over to you, Emma.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you very much. Thank you for asking us to do this. Delighted to be doing it today and delighted to have been working with CIPD on the sort of flexible working agenda way before I think we unfortunately headed into a pandemic and were first forced to work from home. So I'm the Chief Exec of Timewise and the co-founder, and thank you very much for joining the session today. As Lee said, we have an hour, and what we would like to do is to use that hour really to talk to you a little bit more about how you can best support your organisations to not just cope with the current situation in relation to remote working, but hopefully bridge the gap between what we're doing now and what we hope to do over the long term, which is to develop a more inclusive, systemic and hopefully sustainable approach to flexible working, recognising that the way we work has been fundamentally forced to change over the last 8 months, but we envisage it's probably going to be changing and stay different for quite some time to come. Just in terms of the session today, we're delighted to have been supported by the Scottish Government to run this session and a number of sessions for employers across Scotland over the next couple of months. We are also providing some research for the Scottish Government on the state of the flexible jobs market in Scotland. And we are running a number of capacity building programmes for advisors who are also supporting individuals to try and find good flexible work, as well as organisations to improve their approach to flex. So in terms of today, I am going to probably spend about 25 minutes talking to you. Hopefully I will take you through some of the insights that we have learned as Timewise over the years on how to make sure that your approach to flexible working is consistent, is fair, and can be sustained long term, and why the drivers for doing that exist, which I'm sure many of you know already. We're also going to give you some really practical guidance as people managers within your organisations for what you can do to support your teams and to encourage your leaders to evolve their approaches. And then at the very end of the session, I'm also going to introduce you to Lisa Gallagher, who's the Director of Flexibility Works in Scotland, who provides very practical on the ground support to businesses in Scotland, as well as letting you know some of the resources and information that we will be sharing with you after this session. So we have some very practical guides for managers and also for your employees as to how to enhance your approach. So that's what we're doing. It's about a half an hour conversation. There'll be a chance for a Q&A towards the end, and then we'll introduce you to the guides and the resources at the end. Mel, next slide, please. In terms of housekeeping, I am going to be talking quite fast. There's a lot to get through, as Lee said. you're all used to this by now, but please keep on mute. If you have questions or comments for us, we would really, really be delighted if you could share them in either the chat box at the bottom or the Q&A box. Olivia from CIPD will be reading them as we go, and then we'll make sure we try and address as many as we can in the Q&A session. Also, just to say, we are recording this session because we're conscious that CIPD are keen to distribute it as widely as possible to all of your members in Scotland. If you would like to ask us a question in person, please do let us know, but probably we expect it's more likely that we'll be responding to your questions from the chat box. So a bit about Timewise and this aims and the session for the sessions for today. Oh no, back a slide. I'm not driving my slides today, so I'm afraid we've got a bit of a double act. So as I said, purpose of today really is to provide you with some really practical, hopefully, guidance and support for how to, I guess, try and avoid some of the watch outs we're starting to see in terms of how people are working and adapting to remote working now, to look at some of the risks as well as the opportunities for the future, and then also to give you some examples of other organisations and how they have been adapting to flex, both now but also over the last few years as well. Next slide, please, Mel. A bit about Timewise, for those of you who don't know us. So we are a social business. We're also the UK's leading experts on flexible work. We were established about 15 years ago. We do three main things. We do a lot of research and campaign work to champion the value of flexibility in the labour market, both for employers and for individuals and for society at large. We also spend a huge amount of our time in businesses with firms, helping them to develop a more consistent and inclusive approach to flex. Drivers come from sort of the D&I agenda, through to looking at talent acquisition and retention, through to looking at how to build efficiencies and drive performance in different ways. And then the other thing that we do is we also run our own job site, which is I'm afraid currently south of the border, but we represent about 90,000 candidates, increasingly men as well as women, people of all ages, people in all kinds of different professions, who have got a flexible job or looking to get a flexible job, and they want to ensure that they can get the right kind of flexibility in the market. So we understand the recruitment space and we understand the needs of candidates as much as we understand the needs of employers. So we've been doing this for 15 years. We have seen probably more change in the last 8 months than ever. But I would say there's some call outs with that, which is a lot has changed, but in some respects, some ways that we're working haven't changed at all, which I will come on to. In terms of, next slide please, in terms of our client base, just a sort of a selection of clients we work with many FTSE 500 companies and have done for many, many years. And we take them through a range of programs, and we provide a range of services, whether it's training managers to manage people they can't see, to manage flexible workers, whether it's training around flexible job design, so understanding how to design jobs that are part-time or staggered hours, or working in different locations, or whether it is to take sector-specific approaches, so looking particularly maybe at frontline areas such as retail or construction, where actually the kind of flexibility you need is going to be very constrained, but there are other issues that we need to address in terms of skill shortages. So just a very broad client base, and we work with a number of industry bodies such as the CIPD, but also the CBI and other trade bodies as well, in terms of being able to promote the learning from the work that we do to hopefully enable other organisations to adopt fairer approaches to flexible working. Next slide, please. So I thought I'd just kick up for a couple of minutes, talk a little bit about kind of sort of terminology and frame, I guess, at a more macro level, where we sort of see the risks and the opportunities are in the current climate that we're in. The first thing on terminology is that we are in, I guess, what many people are saying is a sort of hybrid working environment at the moment. But truth be told, when the pandemic hit, we all, in the main, decamped to work from home. But remote working is obviously just one form of flexible working. So what we are doing now, even in hybrid terms, is defined as hybrid being you either work from home or you work part in the office. but it's just really important, particularly from a kind of inclusion agenda, to just call out that actually, obviously, there are lots of other ways that we can work flexibly. We at Timewise look at this from 3 axes effectively: where people work, when people work, whether it's what start and end of the day, whether it's compressed weeks or months or years or anything in relation to that, and also how much people work, whether that is full-time or part-time. And interestingly, we were just having a conversation, I know CIPD have done some work on the 4-day week recently, so clearly that sits into the how much. Just to say, what we've seen over this period is a huge shift in terms of the ratio of employees going from working permanently from home before pandemic to working permanently from home now. That shift, so the figures you'll see on this chart, the purple figures are pretty much kind of aggregated data of the ratios of ways that people were working flex in those areas before. And the blue figures are guesstimates based on a number of different data sets of what is shifting now. So the point to make here is we have gone from literally only about 2% of permanent home workers to probably somewhere in the region of 50 to 70%. We have seen a bit of a shift also in flex start and finish times, but actually in terms of, and this is mainly sort of formal shifts, we are not seeing a huge amount of shift in other ways that people need to work. And obviously there's a call out here, which is if we do care about ED&I in our organisations, if we care about particular groups of people, whether it's women, whether it's carers, whether it's people with health issues, we are, if we're not already, going to have to start to think about how we can make adjustments to other ways of flexible working to ensure that people are able to balance work and all the other things that life is throwing at them outside of work and manage to hold on to their jobs effectively. Now, clearly, that's notwithstanding all the activity that is happening in relation to furlough, in relation to short hours working, which is in response to operational demand and market demand slipping, as well as people's personal preferences. But going forward, we are going to start to see more and more people, I think, and we are seeing it at Timewise, looking to adjust hours and work differently, and that's not going to go away. So flexible working is bigger than remote working, and people need more than just remote working. Next slide, please. So in terms of where we are, first thing to say is we have seen, and we've been tracking the flexible employment market and recruitment market for many years. Businesses have been phenomenal in the adjustments that they've been able to make over the most incredible short period of time, and based on extreme, really intense situations and circumstances. So we've seen businesses mobilise, we've seen that happen. We are now in the how do we sustain these ways of working going forward? And we are starting to see from our clients in the market some watch out areas that we really need to be thoughtful of in terms of how do we make sure that this approach is, as I said, inclusive going forward. We're just going to call out a few here, and I'm sure they will resonate with your experiences. And obviously when we come to the Q&A, it'd be really interesting to get your feedback on some of these areas as well as your questions. So the first clear issue to call out is that we are effectively working at home, but we are working really intensively. So the intensification of work has really increased. You will have probably heard by now the term digital presenteeism, which is going up and up. We were again just discussing before this call, we do back-to-back Zoom now, and actually that isn't healthy for those of us who are working from home. We need to be mindful, and the feedback from pulse surveys that I'm sure you're getting and we're certainly seeing is that at the beginning of this crisis, people were really, really positive about the autonomy and control they had when they worked from home. What is starting to happen now is feedback is that is getting under strain, and issues around well-being and isolation, but also burnout are really starting to come through because we are doing more with less. And clearly the role of the manager is key in this. Whether it's really simple practical things, which is when you do your Zoom calls, put them in for an hour, but ensure that you don't expect people to join if they don't need to, say maybe for the first 5 or 10 minutes. We need breaks in our days. We need fresh air. We need to encourage people, and all the things you're probably doing in the guidance, to think about their well-being. But crucially, we also need to think about how we prioritise work and workload, which I'll come on to. So there's an excessive work situation happening. The second is really something around the flex, what we're calling the sort of flex have and have nots, which is a very big issue when it comes to equality and inclusion. And that is that obviously we are seeing particular groups of people, which I will come on to, struggling with new ways of working, but we're also seeing a real risk of a two-tier situation sort of emerging in the labour market, where we have those that can take their laptops and work from home doing that, but we also have around 50% of the working population who are frontline workers. You know, we have nurses, we have teachers, we have construction workers, we have care workers who work outside of the home, and they have to work outside of the home. And one of the issues that we are seeing is obviously the concern that many organisations have when they are in frontline industries as to what kind of opportunities for control and support they can give to their workers. But also if you're in an organisation where you may have a lot of different types of roles, and what's coming through is there's a concern around fairness and consistency in terms of if you work for a local authority and you have a refuse team that need to go out every day and collect the bins, or you have a team of care workers, can you offer everybody else home working and remote working? What are you offering to those other teams? Again, we'll come to that, but fairness and consistency in your approach is going to be really important here. Thirdly, and it's an obvious one to say, and you will have seen lots of research on this, but there is a real watch out for women in particular going through this current crisis. We have seen various pieces of research showing that women are far more likely to consider quitting jobs. At the moment, they are struggling to hold on to them, particularly when they've got caring responsibilities, when they've got young children. We know that 2 in 5 women in the UK at the moment from the TUC research have not got the childcare that they need. Now, obviously, the schools are continuing to be open. That may shift again. Recognising as managers that we have considerable issues for people with caring responsibilities at the moment in terms of managing work and care is a concern, which takes me back to what can we do as managers? We can encourage the male employees that we have to also take some time out or to adjust to different ways of flexibility. We can encourage our teams to think about this in a gender neutral way, in the language that we use in our guidance. And clearly where we do have particular requests from women who are coming through with problems in relation to balancing work, we need to be supporting managers to be able to think about how to make some of those adjustments to the way work is done and the priorities that we set, as I said, that are going beyond just remote working. And then the final watch out really is again, it's an obvious one, but is for those who are going to have a higher health risk, also for the older population, for whom remote working is working, but we have a watch out, which is when we start to move back into offices, and we have in various parts of the country in various times been doing that and then not doing that, we need to be really thoughtful about how we can make sure if they continue to work remotely, they are not going to be at risk of being further excluded from how we engage as teams. And again, I will come on to some of the things you can think about doing to make sure that certain groups of people who are not the norm in terms of where you are working are not excluded. So just some watch outs, which I'm sure you're aware of. Next slide, please. But obviously there are significant opportunities. We have, I mean, it's a difficult word to say in the context of the pandemic we're in, but we have an opportunity here to design work that is fairer for people who struggle with the classic 9 to 5 or the 8 till 6 and the need to be in a particular place to do their work every day, day in, day out. We've been tracking resistance to a wider scaled approach to flexible working by many firms, and most of the things that drive it are around trust and around control. And what we have seen, and also around performance and concerns around performance, the really positive news that's coming through is that we have been forced to address those issues. And in the main, most surveys are showing that managers are pleasantly surprised that they are able to trust people and that actually performance has been maintained, and that productivity, depending on which survey you look at, but a lot of surveys are showing that productivity in the main industry is sticking at the same level, if not being enhanced. Now, in terms of the link to flexibility, there has been historically a lot of evidence to show that if you are able to give people more control and a better work-life balance in terms of how they work, they are likely to be more engaged, they are likely to perform better. And then there is, in theory, a link to productivity. What I would say is the surveys and the research that's coming through at the moment is interestingly showing that those organisations that feel that their teams are connected and engaged and performing better are those where they are getting higher work-life balance scores. So where they are able to make some of those adjustments to the way people are working and to the communication that sits within that to ensure that people are able to get a bit more control and input, not just into the physical place they're working, but how they are making that work. And it's interesting because I think we spend a lot of time talking about technology, and rightly we need the tech to work in different places. But that people piece, that people management piece, that communication, which is all around good management and good HR processes and support, clearly plays a huge part in this as well. So there are some watch outs. We have some considerable opportunities though, and we have a narrative now which we can tell to businesses to dispel some of those myths and assumptions around flexibility. That's not to say it's going to be easy, but I think that's just a really powerful story to tell. And on that, next slide, please. And on that point, I mean, we have been collecting data for years on why flexibility is good for business as much as good for individuals. I'm not going to go through all of this, but just really, I guess, to call out that we are seeing and hearing that, you know, we have at least sort of 7 out of 10 of people in the UK who want to retain some kind of flexible working going forward, having been through this pandemic experience. One research report suggests that could be as much as 13 million people. So the point is, as businesses, we know that people are going to want to carry on working in this way. We are facing hard times ahead. But again, a watch out that we were certainly seeing 6 weeks ago with some of the larger corporates that we work with. There were conversations around at Excos around, can we just have a plan for how many days back in the office? Is it going to be 3 days in the office and 2 days from home? And will that fix it? It needs to be a more mature conversation about different types of flex within teams if we are going to address what people want and expect going forward. So we used to talk at Timewise about, you know, don't fear the floodgates. I think the floodgates are well and truly open now. And the issue for us is, as people managers, is how in practice can we move from waiting for people to ask to being ahead of this conversation, and how can we reassure our business leaders that it's okay to do that based on a lot of the data that you will already have seen. Next slide, please. And just a point to say in the context, we've talked a lot about I've talked about kind of business benefits. I'm sure you will all be aware, but there are significant wider societal benefits for us in enabling people to have access to flexible work. And one of the reasons we've been commissioned to do this work by the Scottish Government is aligned to the Fair Work agenda, and understanding that if we want to tackle some of the inequalities we see in our labour markets, and in particular in terms of people who are either locked out of work or trapped in low-paid jobs, one of the main drivers for this has been structural. So we have skills issues. People may often struggle to get a job in a healthy economic climate or to progress in work if they lack the skills. But aligned to that has always been a structural barrier to people being able to get in or get on in work, which is if you need to work flexibly, and specifically if you probably need to work less because you have caring responsibilities, then job mobility is a challenge for you. You negotiate your flex and then you often get trapped because you look up and you look out and there aren't that many flex jobs to apply for. Now, the reason I'm saying this is, so the photo you'll see is in relation to child poverty. Child poverty is often driven by maternal worklessness, which is often driven by the lack of good quality, flexible and part-time jobs. So as businesses, we have we have a very challenging time ahead, but we recognise there are going to be far more people out of work. And if we are leaning out and where we do have opportunities, I would urge you to consider thinking about what you can do to offer part-time work moving forward. We may all need to, because we will have less work to go around. But it also opens up to a more diverse talent pool that you may have not been able to tap into before. And just one other thing to say on this is at Timewise, we've been tracking the state of the vacancy market in the UK for many years in relation to flexible working. So how many jobs say we are open, or job vacancies have a reference to flexibility, where employers say we are open to flex or part-time hours at the point of hire, and we will say so on our job ads. Historically, when we started 5 years ago, the ratio was 6%. In Scotland, we did an index looking at the vacancies a couple of years ago. It was only 12%. Currently across the UK, it's still only 15%. Our new index will be published next year. At the end of this year. It'll be really interesting to see whether this pandemic and the massive shift we have made in how we work as employees will affect how we advertise jobs going forward when we do start to hire again, and whether we say we're open to flex. I hope it will. We are going to wait and see, and we are actually doing an index for Scotland to see whether there has been a shift or not. But as businesses, it's just a note to say, if you are changing your employment practices and the ways you work, please bear in mind that actually there is still skill shortages out there. You will still be seeking talent. If you want diverse talent and good talent, being open to that conversation about flex at the point of hire will be really, really important. And if you're good at this, it's a fantastic way from your brand perspective to be able to promote it. Next slide, please. So that's just kind of some context stuff. Now I just want to spend the next sort of 10 minutes talking really practically about some of the things that you can do, I hope, to be able to evolve your organisation's approach, and some practical actions that you might be able to think about. So the first is understanding as an organisation the principle around two-way flexibility and being able to articulate that. This is a slide we use a lot, which is, it seems really simple, but actually getting that sweet spot in the middle right is really complicated. So an organisation that is mature and inclusive around flexibility will have really thought through at a team level what kind of flexibility are we prepared to offer, and articulate that. Now that sounds really clear and obvious, but we have for many, many years had a labour market and workplaces where we have been in what we call at Timewise a kind of request response mode, which is we have ways that people work. If you want to work part-time or if you want to work flexibly, you have to, as an individual, ask. So the sort of flexibility is wrapped around individuals. And so many businesses have historically been very reactive. And, you know, we all have our good flexible working policies and procedures, but I'm sure you have managers in your organisations who won't ask those questions. And we did a survey for the CMI a couple of years ago where we asked managers, how often do you proactively bring up the conversation about the way you are working at a performance review with an individual, not just the tasks you're doing? It was only 1 in 5. So the first principle is we need to shift from being reactive to being more proactive and challenging our leaders and challenging our managers to say, what kind of flex are we prepared to offer in this situation and going forward? And how can we do that at scale? And that is about exploring what that sweet spot looks like. And it's going to be more complex because individuals' needs and individual populations at scale are now demanding different kinds of flex, whether it's young people desperately wanting to come back into the office, whether it's carers needing to stay at home, or whether it's people needing to stagger start and finish times. But we also need to bear in mind, how do we manage that with organisational requirements as well? So step 1 is to start having start asking those questions of yourselves and thinking that through. Next slide, please. Secondly, it's about really challenging ourselves on our performance expectations. So, I mean, we've been advising a lot of businesses over the last 6 to 8 months to be really cautious about, again, I've talked about productivity, but about just making assumptions that we cannot have business as usual, and that we really need to recalibrate priorities and expectations on teams. And we also need to be thinking about how we recalibrate job sizes and job tasks based on everything else that people are having to deal with outside of work. And, you know, as managers, that also means looking at ourselves. There is quite a lot of research and increasingly anecdotal feedback that in intense situations, in isolation, in remote working environments, managers are often less likely to delegate because they are concerned about teams. So there is stress and strain in all the roles that we are looking at the moment. But I'd ask your teams, in terms of performance and productivity, are we being able to work together to be collectively productive rather than individually busy? And part of that is about how we manage the communication across virtual worlds and across virtual environments. So, you know, simple practical things like, if we are doing Zoom a lot of the time, does it need to be an hour? Can it be half an hour? Can it be 15 minutes? Can we use Slack? Can we use different technology to communicate? But recognizing we are going to need to over communicate, but we also need to balance that with how we manage to deliver the work that we have to do. And we would also say, please keep up the pulse surveys. So many businesses have been obviously rightly asking people how they are feeling through this period. But really, really interestingly, you know, the bigger firms that are doing these at scale are finding that there are some really concerning trends coming through, but also people with different ideas about how they can manage workload in the context of the situation we're in at the moment. Next slide, please. Third point is to understand the principles around flexible job design. Now, time-wise, we run whole workshops on this, so I'm going to just give a very, very brief summary. But I've talked a lot about the difference, again, from an inclusive perspective, from just remote working into understanding the principles also of when people work and how much people work. And, you know, as organisations, as people managers, we need to be challenging ourselves on how we can explore or do some of the other ways of working. So do we need to be offering part-time working because people are not able to legitimately sustain the number of hours that they need to work if they have other issues outside of work, whether it's care or health? If we are looking at how much and we're looking at part-time, then how do we actually chunk up that job? And so historically, often the reason that part-timers are often scored down in performance reviews is because they're judged at the same level as full-time workers. And often that's because the job hasn't been redesigned. When someone is asked to go part-time, remember request response model, the issue is the job hasn't been changed that much. And that's why we often find, and it's interesting in the 4-day week, if you move from 5 to 4 days, you can sort of fudge that. If you go from 5 to 3, you have 2 full days of work that need to go somewhere. So starting to have those proactive conversations, if people want to work part-time, what does that mean in terms of the team? Can we take that activity and displace it? Do we need to bring somebody else in a job share or a job split? Or actually, is there less work? So we are consciously recognising that that person can reduce their hours. So it's important to start thinking through some of those wider parameters. And also, in terms of when people work, again, the issue for frontline businesses, or for those teams where we have some frontline workers and we have others who are able to work remotely, is you can still offer a fair and a consistent approach when it comes to saying, we want to explore ways that we can give you some more control or input in how you work or how you may need to work, and have some say in that and some predictability in that, even if the outcome isn't going to be the same. So a fair approach, and being able to scope what could we possibly do to help adjust either when you work or how much you work if we can't adjust where you work, is going to be really important. Again, there's a lot more information in the guidance we're going to send out to you, but just the principles of understanding how tasks and roles are designed in the context of these 3 axes is a really, really important principle that we need to understand when we think about how we're going to be working in the future. And if we get it right, all the evidence shows you can build far more efficient and productive teams. Next slide, please. So this is really just to say we will be sending out to all of you and sharing with CIPD the 2 guides that we have produced. A lot of those sort of principles I've talked around and the kind of understanding around job design and performance, we will be giving you some very tangible questions and suggestions to think about in terms of how you can facilitate, whether as a manager or whether as a people manager trying to support your managers, more proactive conversations to help people start to address some of these issues and to try and support your team to develop different ways of working that's more sustainable. Next slide, please. So in terms of the team's dynamic, it's a really interesting one. We often, at Timewise, when we think about organisations that are sort of in reactive mode, hear managers saying, well, I've said yes to Jane, she can work part-time, and I've said yes to Bob and he can do 2 days a week from home. Now, this is obviously pre-COVID world, but I kind of need to stop now because if it gets any bigger, it's going to disrupt the way the team operates. We've had to move on from that now because we have whole teams who have been massively disrupted. The point is, you know, we all are interdependent on each other, and the shift in flexible maturity that we are talking about is a shift to say, this isn't about a few individuals requesting to work in a different way. This is about trying to support teams to think about how they can, between them, manage that interdependency. So we've been doing some work on construction sites in London at the moment, where, you know, if you are not there to load the digger, then the person driving the digger can't offload, and everything is timed and everything is scheduled and shifted into really, really clear patterns and rotas. But there are always ways that you can explore how you can make adjustments if people need to maybe take an afternoon off, or if people need to try and compress their hours, or actually they physically don't have to be on site for 7:30 in the morning for the briefing, they can do it on video. So it's just being creative and thinking about different processes. And this is just, photo here is an example of some work we did with Tesco a couple of years ago. We worked in a store in the Midlands with them, and we looked at, for the managers in that store, how they could have how they could enhance their ability to have control and input and some more predictability into when they were working. And we were able to give them that. We were able to shift notice from 2 to 6 weeks of schedules, and their work-life balance scores went through the roof. They went from 44% to 91%. And that, in terms of the engagement, the commitment, and what you get back from those teams, was really, really valuable, just in terms of being able to try and schedule a bit more in advance. So the point being, teams are interdependent, but if you engage and evolve those conversations, then you will often find that teams will have solutions to how they can manage that workload as well. Next slide. I'm nearly finished, and then we'll go to the Q&A. So the last piece I just wanted to talk about briefly was leadership. None of this will work, and you will all know, unless your business leaders are committed and engaged and understand the value of not just enabling people to have control over how they work, but also the ability to facilitate and to trust them to explore ways of doing that. So we often at Timewise talk about leadership shadow. There are 4 principles that we would say leaders who are going to support and drive change around inclusive, flexible working need to have. The first is they need to own the vision and the principles we talked about. So they need to recognise the business case, which is changing and adjusting as we go, because, you know, we are in a buyer's market when it comes to talent, but we are also facing significant challenges when it comes to thinking about what employers can require of people, because there aren't many other places people can go. Having said all of that, good talent right now, if they don't get the flex that they need, will walk, because people are still facing skill shortages and gaps. So leaders who have a clear vision and a clear principle as to how they want to engage with flexibility, that's really important. Secondly, trusting and empowering teams. So mapping that principle and that vision, but then devolving within teams and trusting teams to explore how they can make flexibility work in particular roles and tasks. The third is to commit to invest in this, because we invest in technology, we invest in innovation, we need to invest in supporting our managers to understand some of these principles around job design. So that means training and support, and there are organisations like us and like Flexibility Works who offer that sort of support. And then finally, leaders who walk the talk, and so who role model. And again, you know, even the smallest things, you know, at your email, you may send messages, but your expectations of when people will reply as a leader, you will schedule Zoom calls, but maybe you will just make sure that you give people gaps to have conversations in between. It's just the little things as leaders. And ideally, being able to show that you are managing your work within the hours that you have. So that's just a bit on leadership. Last slide, and then we'll open up to Q&A. So in terms of sort of next steps, really just a summary of the principles that I've talked about here. In terms of going forward, recap, consider what are the principles and the vision you want for long-term flex, and how to make that shift from reactive to proactive. Listen to your teams, keep asking them, because there are ideas and there will be demand and there will be expectations around different ways of flexible working. Build capabilities around job design. And crucially, think about this as a framework approach, not just something that sits within D&I or HR. You know, the way we work and the way we are working in the future will have changed. Flexible working should no longer just be a nice to have in a D&I policy briefing. This is something that we need to think about structurally in terms of how we all work. And then I just want to end on a couple of examples. Next slide, please, of organisations who've been doing this well for a very long time. So just a few examples here. Again, this has been recorded, so you can have a read of these, but just one to call out, which is Lloyds Bank, have done some really, really interesting work and are very proactive in their approach. They have addressed it both in the context of frontline and head office. They have a whole range of roles, and they have developed over the years an agile working toolkit. So when I talk about that principle of leadership, they devolve responsibility to teams, and then they train teams, and they've given teams a toolkit to enable teams to explore within every role, where's the flex? What can we offer, and what can we concede to in terms of that sweet spot? But they've been doing that for many years. But there's a lot of learning to be had out there. And on our website, we have some great case studies and examples. So please do check it out if you're looking for inspiration. And then the very last slide, just a Scottish employer who was on we run a power list every year for businesses and individuals who are championing new ways of working, flexible ways of working, and particularly for the individuals, we champion people working very big roles part-time, because we want to prove it can be done. And this is just a fantastic restaurant in Edinburgh that does a 4-day week. And it's just to show that even in some of these really, really challenging industries, it is possible to fundamentally change the way that we design work. And Paul has done this because his driver was well-being, it was to avoid burnout, he wanted to have great chefs and great teams. Having done it for a couple of years now, motivation and creativity has gone up. So it's worked for his business. Clearly, his business is going to be in a tough situation right now. We all get that, but it was proven to work. So I just think it's a really powerful story to end with. I'm going to stop there. That was a very, very broad rattle through of what we've tried to sort of download from 15 years in this space. But I'd like to now open it up to any questions or comments. Lee, I'd be delighted if you want to join. There may be questions for you for CIPD as well. And just see if people have anything they would like to ask in relation to what we've been talking about.
Everyone has been very shy, Emma. We've not had any questions so far that I can see.
No questions. Can I ask people to ask? I'd be really interested in whether you have, those of you on the call, whether what we talked about in relation to the part-time piece, whether that has resonated, and whether people have found that they've been able to make adjustments around part-time versus just more broad terms of remote working, or whether they've seen demand there, because that's one of the things that we're particularly keen at the moment at Timewise to understand. We have somebody. Okay, I'd be really keen if anyone has any thoughts on part-time. But in the meantime, I've got a question that's just come up. I'm interested in finding out more about the concerning trends in the Pulse surveys. So thank you for asking the question. I can't give explicit information because this is based on the clients that we work with, but there has been quite a lot of anecdotal feedback in relation to pulse surveys that the positives are starting to shift into concerns from employees. So the main thing that we're tracking has been, at the beginning, a very positive sense of autonomy and control, as I said earlier, in terms of working remotely. And now that the anxiety is around isolation, issues in relation to burnout, well-being, and an anxiety of effectively a bit of a two-tier piece going on. And there are certain groups in particular that are feeding that back. I don't know if that helps, but I think it was really just to reflect the importance of continuing to do some pulse surveys, and also to ask people more specific questions about the ways they are working, as much as how they are feeling.
There's a few more coming, Emma. Do you want me to shout some out?
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay, no worries. So, so someone's responded to your question about part-time, just first of all saying that there's a lack of job mobility due to working part-time, which can become a real issue. So I'm sure you've heard that before, but that kind of answers the question that you put out there. We've also had the question come in saying, Alison from our South East Scotland branch has said what they've seen in the past is that job design is often based on individual requirements. So what happens when the job becomes vacant and the new employee entering that role has different flexible needs? And how does an organisation deal with that if they've kind of previously designed the job around the kind of person who's now outgoing?
It's a really, really interesting question. So the first thing I would say is to get some feedback from the person who's outgoing as to how the job design had worked. So if it was compressed or reduced, were they able to do the work in that time? Or, what were the pros and cons? The second thing would be then to do a review of the role, because roles are dynamic as well as people's lives. And you're right, roles are often designed about people's preferences, but to review the role and decide, okay, from an organisational and managerial perspective, what tasks and activities do we need to be done in a physical location with teams, and what can be done from home, and what's the size of this role? And that is sometimes quite hard to do. And then the third thing I would say is if the role has been flexible before, but you're open to suggestions, but you're not sure, to say on your job ads that you are open to flexibility, and then to have a very proactive conversation with a candidate about what kind of flex they might want in the context of the role. Because often candidates are the best people if they've been doing the job somewhere else and they've been doing it flexibly somewhere else. They may well give you some ideas. Like any role though, and any new hire, you will need to set objectives and then monitor over the first 3 months at least whether they are performing, but just to be really clear that you are transparent about how you are monitoring performance against the expectations about how much work there is, as well as their performance. So, but you'll have to sort of review, and it's fine to then make adjustments if the job is too big for 4 days a week, or you may need to think about other options, job shares, etc. I hope that answers the question.
A few more questions coming in. So first of all, have you, I guess time-wise, worked with organisations such as fire and police services about how they manage flexible working when they have kind of established rotas or shifts that they're kind of required to fill, I guess, based on the nature of the job?
So not in the fire service. We did a little bit with the police service a few years ago, but we have also done a lot of work with nurses in a number of major NHS trusts. And in fact, we did a project for Department for Health and Social Care a couple of years ago on rotas, rosters, and how to manage teams who are interdependent and who are 24/7. And there's some really interesting learning, and I would say, please get in touch if you want to find out more, but and the reports are all on our website. What I would say is clearly you need to think about, you've got the where, when, how much axis of job design, but you also have what we call shift life balance, which is about input predictability and advance notice into shifts as a driver for individuals, and for your organisation to make sure you can drive efficient shifts, but also give people some kind of input in that way. So yes, it's clearly a different but really complex area, and one that I think needs far more attention than it's getting at the moment.
Thanks, Emma. There's a couple of other questions kind of related to the same thing on what flexibility can they offer to frontline staff, and this is talking about nurses and clinical ward managers, and someone else talking about frontline workers. So I suppose get in touch with Emma and our team for more information on what they've done on that. Another couple of questions. Have you done much research on how people account for the positives and negatives of remote working?
So we've done lots of surveys over the years, both with managers and with individuals. A lot of the issues, I mean, so again, there's a lot of information on our website. What I would say in terms of the negatives, we're very mindful that the negatives are often that if you, as an individual, get some form of flex, you often get trapped by it. So we know that there's a real issue when it comes, and the reference earlier on to part-time, absolutely. Part-time workers, and particularly part-time women, are the group that are least likely to progress in work and most likely to be trapped in low pay. And that is because we often make an assumption that part-time is for low value work and low input and low commitment, and actually big jobs can't be done on a part-time basis. Again, a lot of people on our power list would disprove that. So I think there's a lot of issues around part-time in particular in terms of negatives. There are issues around two-way flexibility, which is defining flex for who. So clearly at the hard end, we have 0 hours, we have people whom flex is enforced on. Positives, again, we've got lots of data. There is a huge amount of data. Us and CIPD are part of a government task force that has put lots of data together on the business case for flex, both for and crucially for businesses, and there's a lot of really strong data there to show how it can enhance performance, talent attraction, talent retention, and it can save on overhead and churn, etc. So again, please get in touch or have a look. I'm sure CIPD will be able to give you a link to the data as well.
And then just really quickly, there's kind of 2 last questions, but they're kind of interrelated in some way. So the first one is asking what are the challenges around culture and inclusion? So they're coming across lots of different issues between a pre-existing team moving to remote and recruiting new people, or to an entirely new remote team. And then someone else saying that RBS has been working flexibly for quite some time, and prior to lockdown, they had required employees in non-customer facing roles to work away from the office for a percentage of time. So how can that job be made available to a candidate who isn't set up to work out of the office for whatever reason? So I guess those are kind of interrelated in how do you make flex work for people who maybe aren't set up to do that or who've never done that before?
So on the last point, I mean, that will require a level of investment to ensure that people are set up properly from home to be able to do so. And that's an infrastructure conversation and a cost. I would argue, and there's data, there's been some data and research done recent, I think a couple of years ago on call centres that showed that actually performance and productivity does increase when you can do it remotely. So it's probably worth, the ROI is probably there, but that will require investment. But also, I think the broader point is how do you onboard people in a remote world? And it's really, really challenging. I did a session with the CBI a couple of weeks ago, and this was one of the issues that a lot of their members were coming up with. You know, there are several things we're seeing. We're seeing some really interesting mentoring and buddy systems, but we are seeing investment in different ways of communicating with people. I think it's important to make a distinction between the need to communicate and engage and the need to be face-to-face. So you can do a lot to communicate and bring people with, but I'll be honest with you, it's really, really hard to onboard people remotely without some form of face-to-face contact. We've heard of firms going for a walk in the park with new recruits just at social distancing level. This isn't going to be like this forever. I think we have to deal with how we manage onboarding now, but I do think there are some principles that we can explore about how you onboard generally well, and we don't always do that well anyway, and how you translate that into a remote environment. I'm really conscious of time, and I'm really, really interested that there have been questions. Thank you so much. But I'm conscious, I'd like to just spend the last couple of minutes, if that's all right, just sharing with you some additional resources, and also introducing you to Lisa, who runs a fantastic organisation in Scotland, who hopefully will also be able to help you. So just very briefly, some links here in terms of time-wise. Check out our website. We will be distributing, as I said, the guides that we've produced specifically for this programme to you all. But in terms of sort of practical advice that is local and someone to talk to, Lisa, can I ask you to come on and just say hello and tell people, if they don't already know you, and I'm sure they do, about Flexibility Works, which is relatively new but fantastic, and on your doorstep.
Oh, thanks so much, Emma, and thank you for your brilliant presentation, as ever, and for all the amazing questions as well. It feels like the conversation could have gone on and on there, doesn't it? So it was really great to be part of that. Today, we've known Emma and our team at Timewise and Leanne for a number of years now. So I'm the co-founder and director of Flexibility Works, and myself and my co-founder Nikki Slowey have been working to support employers to have greater flexibility for about 6 or 7 years now here in Scotland, and we launched Flexibility Works in April of this year. And we're a social business, and we're supported by the Scottish Government and the Hunter Foundation. We work with employers large and small to embed a more flexible way of working, which benefits, as we've heard today, and you will all know, people, business and the economy. And I guess our approach is, and it's similar to Timewise, we're super practical and supportive. It's all about the how, you know, we get some of this stuff done now. So in terms of what we could do to help you or support you along this journey, we offer facilitation support to senior leadership teams to establish a clear vision for flexibility in the organisation. We run training and support for line managers, and we also do a lot of employee engagement work. So what Emma was talking about, you know, talking to employees, focus groups, what are people thinking and feeling during these times, and how can that help build a stronger kind of plan and strategy going forward around flex. And I guess what we bring at Flexibility Works is a little bit of extra expertise on flexible working into organisations. We also run monthly business to business best practice sharing events, which are free to join if you're interested to pick up this conversation. We have lots of great employers who are doing really interesting, cool stuff in Flex. They share what they're doing, so you're very welcome to join those. We run employer awards every year, which shine a light on best practice. And we also do research about what's happening in Scotland around Flex, and we comment in the media to keep this in people's minds. Something to flag that may be of interest to some of you, part of our work specifically aims to support lower income workers to have greater flex. And we know, and we've talked about today, these groups often have less access. So we have the capability to work with 4 employers every year, pro bono, to improve access to flex and lower income roles. So if you'd like to talk to us potentially about working together on that basis, please feel free to get in touch. And if you've heard anything today from Emma that strikes a chord for you in terms of your own flexible working plan, strategy, if you would like some practical help here on the ground in Scotland, please feel free to give us a call. We'd be really happy to have an informal chat with you about how we might be able to help. So that's us here at Flexibility Works, and we're based in Glasgow and, well, in our various homes, Glasgow and thereabouts. So that's us. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Lee, for inviting us to join today.
Thanks, Lisa. And Lee, thanks again for enabling us to share some of our thoughts with your members. I hope it's been helpful today. I hope we're not one of hundreds of Zoom calls you're doing today, although I'm sure we may well be. I hope you do take a break, get some food, get some fresh air, take a breath, and please do get in touch with us as well, or have a look on our website if you want to find out any more about the work that we've been doing. And good luck over this next period. We are going to need to be resilient and tough, but we will come out the other side, and hopefully with a new way of working that gives us all a bit more balance. So Lee, back to you to say, to finish.
No, thanks Emma, and thank you Lisa. As I said at the beginning, we're delighted to be working with Timewise north of the border. And of course, we already work closely with Nikki and Lisa and their team at Flexibility Works, and look forward to continuing to do it. As Lisa said, it's really about taking that kind of maybe more creative approach in considering different things. And I know that the monthly sessions that the team run will allow you to kind of explore and hear about what different organisations are doing, which is just a great way to learn, isn't it? So anyway, we're over time. I hate running over time, so I just want to thank Emma again. And it's a priority area of work for us at CIPD. We've got a lot of guidance and a lot of research and insight. And as Emma says, we'll share some of that with you, and the session's been recorded. So you can kind of reflect and come back to that. And we just look forward to working with you again. Okay, thank you, everybody.